I tested out a drug, and now I can't stop eating people. Let me just start with a little backstory. I was dead broke, fresh out of high school and struggling to pay for college. My job at the local mall wasn't cutting it, and time was running out fast for me to cover next semester's tuition. During one of my very limited off days, I had been in the grocery store, picking up a few things to hold me over for the next 2 weeks. As I stood over the frozen meat section, lost in a trance with my mind in a million places at once, I felt a hand on my shoulder. "Good morning, sir. How are you doing this morning?" I glanced over his uniform. It was too refined and decorated to be that of a recruiter. Looking down at my own outfit, I realized that I looked, in fact, quite homeless. "Ah, you know, making it through. That's excellent to hear, sir. Hey, I have a question. Have you ever given any thought to the U.S. military?" He asked as if he knew my answer, as if he could read it on my face. "Listen, man, I'm in college, barely making it by, but you know, yes, sir, I do. Mind if I ask what you're going to school for?" I answered honestly by telling him that I was going to be an engineer, to which he replied enthusiastically, "Oh man, the Army is begging for some engineers, and guess what? All your schooling paid for. You help us, we help you." I thought about it for a moment. I hated to admit it, but his words were swaying me a bit, and he could sense it. That was a dangerous place to be in. Before I got the chance to respond, he spoke again. "Pays good too." I knew I had to put a stop to this now before he got more of his foot in the door, so I responded with a quick, "I'll think about it," as I shuffled away. As I walked with my back toward him, he called out once more, "Please do, we'll be seeing ya." He then seemed to speak into what I assumed was a mic that must have been tucked neatly under his collar. I couldn't make out what he said, just that his face had shifted from approachable to what can best be described as a look of complete authority as he meandered back towards the entrance of the store. I hadn't thought much of it and continued shopping as usual. I had work the next day, and as I returned home from an absolutely soul-crushing shift, I found that an envelope had been placed in the seam of my doorframe. It was marked with a stamp bearing the logo of the United States Army. Damn, I thought to myself, they really don't play about their recruitment. I was about to push my way inside, ready to collapse in bed, when my foot landed on yet another sheet of paper. "Eviction notice," in bright red lettering. The tape must have slipped right off the metal door. I don't know if it was because of my exhausting shift, or if my mind had just completely given up, but I simply stepped over the notice and made my way to my bedroom, tossing the envelope on the coffee table. I was out before my head even hit the pillow. The next morning, I had to fight to get out of bed. Everything seemed hopeless, and I can admit, this is the moment where I had lost faith in myself entirely. I remembered the words of the guy from the store: schooling paid for, guaranteed benefits, guaranteed housing, plus a guaranteed job. Fuck it. I ripped the envelope open and removed its contents anxiously. What I read surprised me. This wasn't a recruitment letter. Well, it was, just not for military recruitment. They weren't asking me for my service. They weren't even asking me to consider. This letter was to recruit people to test out a new drug that the Army had been developing. There weren't many details on the drug itself or its effects, but it did include that payment for this little trial would be $5,000 for 1 day of my time. The letter looked official. It was even watermarked with the bald eagle symbol that you see the government use. It provided a phone number and urged me to call immediately if interested. I called, and on the third ring a man picked up. I recognized the voice immediately. It was the man from the store. "Afternoon, Donovan. I'm assuming you got our letter." "Yeah, I did. Wait, how do you even know where I live?" He responded confidently. "It's our job to know, son. Now, I'm assuming you're calling because you're interested in our trial, correct?" For a moment, I froze. I'd never even smoked weed before, and now they want to give me $5,000 to try a drug meant for soldiers. Then I remembered the eviction notice, and it were as though my mouth spoke without permission. "Absolutely, I'm more than interested. Excellent, excellent. We're sending the address over now." Just as the last word escaped his lips, my phone chimed with an email notification. It was completely blank save for the single address. It didn't even appear to have a sender, just an anomalous email amongst the thousands in my mailbox. Before I could speak, the line went dead and silence filled the apartment once more. But fuck, he hadn't given me a time. "Oh, well," I thought, "I'll just go now." Hopping in my car and inputting the address into the Maps app on my phone, I found that the location was 2 hours from my home. It's $5,000. It's $5,000. I kept repeating to myself as the car ride dragged on. After about 45 minutes, I found that I was in the middle of nowhere and still had 75 minutes to go. I drove on, repeating my mantra as I passed trees, fields, and more trees. Finally, just on the horizon, surrounded by towering oak trees, was the most secret, government-looking facility I had ever seen. It must have been 20 stories tall, no windows, a single door directly in the center, and no cars in sight. I thought this was probably the strangest detail of all. Surely someone had to be here besides me. This should have been the sign that made me turn around and figure things out on my own. I didn't know just how out of my depth I really was. But of course, it's $5,000. I pulled my car into the empty parking lot and started for the door. I opened it up and was greeted by darkness, an empty warehouse. I had been duped. Duped on an astonishingly professional level, but duped nonetheless. However, just as I began to turn and walk away, I could hear footsteps, and row by row the overhead fluorescent lights began to flicker on. Walking towards me with a false, corporate smile was the man from the store. "Donovan," he cheered, "so glad you could make it." I glanced around suspiciously. "You the only person here." He responded, almost eagerly, "I'm the only person you need." As he approached, he extended an arm and wrapped it firmly around my shoulders. "Follow me right this way, young man." As we walked, a sudden feeling of dread began to come over me. Dread quickly morphed into regret, and I attempted to pull away from the man. To my dismay, his arm did not budge. He was essentially dragging me across the concrete floor as I struggled timidly. As he pulled me, he just kept reassuring me, "This is what you wanted. You're evicted. You need this. How are you going to pay for school? I promise this will all be over soon." The lights continued flickering on as we moved through the warehouse. Eventually, the place was illuminated enough to reveal a door that I had not noticed before, and we were headed towards it fast. I'm not sure how, but I managed to get my nerves under control. Maybe I was overreacting. I mean, it's the military. I'm not selling an organ to someone on the black market or anything like that. I told myself I'd be fine. Once we entered the room, I was blinded by the sheer whiteness of everything, so much so that I had to squint my eyes to avoid a headache. Right dead in the center of the room was a steel chair with leather restraints attached to the armrests. I felt the man's grip on me loosen as he gestured to the chair with his hand. "Please, Mr. Meeks, have a seat." Cautiously, I sat down, and he began strapping my arms down tight. "Hey, so, this isn't really needed, right? Just a precaution." His lack of an answer concerned me. He just continued tightening the restraints. "Oh yeah, when do I get my mon?" the man interrupted. He was no longer turned towards me, but instead was facing a mirror on the wall just to the right of me. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have here today Subject 1 for the conduction of the GH75 trial. As you can see, the subject is restrained and is of no threat to anyone. I ask that you please take notes and be prepared to discuss what you've learned once the trial is concluded. No threat to anyone." What an odd thing to say. Amidst my confusion, the mirror seemed to disappear. What was once mine and the man's reflection was now a window. On the opposite side sat about a dozen men and women dressed in military uniform, each one studiously looking on, gripping their pads and pens firmly. Just as a precaution, the man continued. On cue, 2 armed guards with SWAT shields aggressively entered the room, rifles trained on me. This drug is experimental after all. I knew I had made a mistake. Nothing about this was normal, but hell, what was I gonna do now? The man finally turned to me once more before whispering to me through a twisted smile, "Thank you for your service." Before I knew it, a quick bit of pain radiated from the crease of my right arm. He had stuck the needle in and injected me. There was no going back now. I expected to feel, I don't know, organ failure or something like that, but no, instead what I felt was complete and total euphoria. Not like heroin, at least I don't think, more like the strength in my body had been amplified. I felt capable. This feeling grew, and before I could register anything, I felt more than capable. I felt disrespected that they believed these restraints could hold me, and my forearm muscles began to tighten and push hard against the leather straps. I could see my veins pulsating. They pushed so hard against my skin that they looked as though they were glowing. My heart began to beat out of my chest and my brain was pounding. The pain made me angry, so angry. I couldn't help but gnash my teeth and struggle violently against the puny restraints. I could feel my face radiating with heat, and I must have looked completely insane judging by the nervous looks on the guards' faces. "Wipe that fear off your faces, soldiers," the man screamed. "You are Marines." The man looked totally in control. This made me even angrier. At this point it felt like there was fire beneath my skin begging to be released, and my mouth overflowed with froth. My anger was reaching an absolute boiling point, and all that I could feel throughout my entire body was pure unbridled rage. I could feel the chair shaking as I thrashed and growled like a madman, and even so, the man remained completely calm. I knew I was going to kill him. I knew that there was no way he'd leave this building alive. None of them would leave this building alive. They were all dead, and none of them even knew it yet. In one final explosive burst of energy, the leather restraints snapped, and with supernatural speed I had sprung from the chair. Both guards opened fire on me immediately, but I wouldn't go down. I could see their terrified faces, the faces of the people behind the glass, and it fueled me. I hobbled towards the guards, against their barrage of gunfire. With one swipe of my hand, I ripped the shield from the guard on the right, tearing his arm completely off of his body in the process. His partner had begun beating me over the head with his rifle. Snatching it from his hand, I heard the shattering sound of each of his fingers that he had wrapped so tightly around the weapon. Both guards were screaming now, and God, my God, was it infuriating. I forced the barrel of the gun deep into the guard's throat. He made a gargled, wet sound before I pulled the trigger and emptied the rest of his magazine into his stomach. He fell to the floor lifeless, leaving his partner alone and critically injured. I didn't need to do anything to him. Enough had already been done. He would die knowing he failed. I looked back at the man. There it was. There was that satisfying look of terror I had been so desperately trying to evoke. He fumbled clumsily to open the door to get to the other side of the glass window. His trembling made it impossible, however. I drew out the moment, savored every step I took towards him, every beat of his heart and trickle of his sweat. As I stood over him, he fell to his knees like a coward. Begging for his life, tears were rolling down his face as he asked God for forgiveness, asked me for forgiveness, but I was beyond reason. The first punch knocked him out cold. I could hear his neck splinter from the second one. But I wasn't satisfied. I drove my fist into his head over and over again. I could hear his bladder failing as fluids began to pool around his previously spotless trousers. I couldn't stop. Once I hit brain, that's when the seizing began. His thralls were unnatural and sharp. Though they had been mostly destroyed, his eyes rolled into his skull, and his body looked like it was being lifted off the ground from his midsection as he continued to seize. With one final punch, his head cracked open from the front to the back. Brain matter oozed out of the wound, and I stared in awe at the bloody mess in front of me. In the midst of my rage, I had neglected to feel the void that had opened in my stomach. I had never been hungrier. My mind told me one thing: you know what you want to do. Without even a hint of hesitation, I began picking at the brain matter that leaked from the man's destroyed head. It started off small, but before I could help it, I was shoveling fistfuls of this guy's memories directly into my mouth. The taste was indescribable. I couldn't stop, period. I devoured what was left of his face before moving on to the guards. The more I ate, the more I felt the drug's effects kick in. I had almost forgotten about the people behind the window. They couldn't have been so lucky. The window, the false mirror, it was nothing. It shattered from just one hit, and they began trampling over each other trying to leave the room. I tore them apart, friends, limb from limb, bite by bite. They're all gone now. They're all mine. I exited that warehouse covered from head to toe in their precious lifeblood, carrying with me the vial of the mystery drug that I found in the recruiter's coat pocket. I could barely contain myself on the drive home, and that's where I am now. I'm not concerned with the eviction, school, and certainly not money. My mind has been reprogrammed. That's what the drug does. It's a violent drug made for soldiers who were meant to die, a last-stand drug. I have no intentions on dying. I have no intentions to stop. The only intention that remains in my mind is simple: find more food.